Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're staying warm. I get to introduce myself today. I am that important. I'm excited to talk to you guys today. This has been a great conference so far. I've really enjoyed a few of the sessions that I've been able to go to. Today, we're actually going to be talking about practical uses of agentic AI in businesses. I called this How Agents Actually Impact the Bottom Line. And the purpose of this presentation is going to be seeing examples, real examples of businesses that are implementing agentic AI agents and how it is enabling them to be faster, smarter, more efficient, save money, okay? My name is Chris Hand. I'm the CEO of GenServe AI, based out of Huntsville, here, a local. And I've been building software for a really long time, and since ChatGPT launched, I've been building software based on generative AI. So a couple years ago, I was actually working at a venture studio out of Nashville, and we had the thesis that this generative AI thing was probably going to be big. It was right when ChatGPT launched, and as technologists ourselves, we thought there are a lot of uses for this, so we went all in. And we launched about 6 different companies. All of them were product-led. All of them had generative AI as its cornerstone. And then based on those learnings, based on the technology that we produced, we launched GenServe AI, which is my business, and we do AI implementations for businesses. The businesses that recognize opportunity, they don't have AI expertise in-house, and so we'll partner with them and do it for them. So all the examples that you're going to see today are actually running in businesses today, and we can go as deep as we want on them because I'm actually curious, by show of hands, how many of you have been able to do the workshops here so far? Yeah, so they've been hugely popular, and one of the reasons they've been hugely popular is people want to see how these things work in practice, how you actually implement these, what does it mean to build an agent. And I'm really hoping that if you take nothing else from this talk, you take 2 things away. One is a mental framework for how you can identify opportunities in your business, your team, your personal life, where you might be able to be more efficient with agentic AI. That's the first. The second is what's possible. What can actually be done in a business, on a team, for yourself, with agents, okay? So we're gonna start with the first, okay? First off, a perspective. A lot of hype around AI right now. Nobody knows that more than I do because I fight it all day, every day. Some of those things that you see is that AGI is around the corner. That's artificial general intelligence, when AI is just so smart that nobody ever has to work again. Everybody keeps saying that. The second is that it's going to replace everybody everywhere, kind of the Terminator scenario. The third, and these are the most dangerous ones. You'll see it on LinkedIn if you visit LinkedIn for about 10 seconds, which is that AI is the magic solution for everything in your business. Just give it to AI, it will do it. And then the last, and this is really practical, is the business leaders who are just asking the question, what can we technically do with AI? And I would argue that's the wrong question. So the reality is that AI is amazing for reducing very practical process friction, for relieving margin pressure within your business. You think about trying to scale without necessarily hiring more people, but just being more efficient. By being more scalable, and the most important thing, kind of the purpose of this talk, is to show ROI, return on investment, is to actually have a positive business case. So this is the question we ask all day, every day, when we are trying to help a business, and I would encourage you to apply it in your team, in your home, in your business, just depending on where you are, which is, where do you want to be in 1 to 3 years? That could be 6 months, that could be 3 months, right? But have your goals clearly in mind. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? Define the destination first. The second is, what's preventing you from getting there, right? I'm not there today. What's preventing me from getting there, okay? And then by asking these first 2 questions, you get to the third, which is now you can define your initiatives, because those initiatives should be specifically mapped to constraints, okay? And of course you would map specific agentic AI initiatives to those constraints, but it doesn't start with AI. That's actually extremely important, okay? How do you identify those constraints? this is the single most powerful question you can ask, which is, if you doubled your business next week, what would break first? Okay? And replace that word business with anything. Doubled your workload, doubled your volume, doubled your whatever, right? I service 50 customers a week. What would happen if next week you had to service 100 or 200? What is the first part of your business that is going to break down? That's where you need to look first at what your processes are, what your constraints are, okay? Now, there's a caveat to this, because immediately we might start asking this question and think, okay, well, yeah, let's do this. Now, where do I put AI? Lots of business leaders are asking the question right now, where do I put AI? How can I adopt AI? We need to be AI first, right? You hear all of those things. But you really need to look at this side first. Okay, for you it's the left, which is you may not actually need AI, right? You really just need a SOP. Everybody doing the same thing the same way. Maybe you need better data access. Maybe you just need more traditional organization, right? And this is important because we'll touch on this in the next slide, but AI will not make a bad process better, okay? You need to start with a good process. And as somebody who does AI processes all day, every day, we spend the majority of our time on process, on figuring out what the ideal process should be. And it's even more important when you start automating things. There's actually a really good interview with Elon Musk where he talks about the steps of automation. And the first thing to do is to list your process. The second thing to do is get rid of every step in that process that you don't need. And then you can start thinking about automation. And it's similar with AI, okay? Now, here are some targets, some hallmarks of a process that might be a candidate for agentic AI. And these are high-volume, repeatable processes. Could you write an instruction manual for somebody to do this? If you can, and even better, if you have written an instruction manual, that can actually be the foundation of something that you give an agent. And we're going to use the term agent loosely here. I'm a big believer that that term is overused. I would argue that a lot of things aren't agents, they're just workflows. Workflow is something that starts with a repeatable input, ends up with a repeatable output. It could do a lot of things in between, but same input, same output, probably a workflow. Could still use AI, could still use what you might call an agent. The second thing, though, and this is a differentiator, is that agents typically make decisions. They could be really simple ones, they could be complex ones, but they're generally making decisions. And the most obvious one, the most no-duh one, but is really easy to skip over, is are you dealing with natural language? And I don't necessarily mean a chat window, an email, a PDF that is written or typed up originally for a person. That's natural language. We would consider that unstructured data because traditionally you can't query that. In fact, up until a few years ago where LLMs became really popular, that was pretty much a black box for your business, which is one of the reasons why this is such a huge paradigm shift for so many businesses, is because how many of you work in a business where you have just a boatload of PDFs on a drive somewhere? Raise of hand. Yeah, I think most all of you probably should have raised your hands, but I understand that you didn't. Okay, so this is really important. This is an exceptionally important concept, and I don't know who said this. I think it was me, but if not, it's really important because wherever you try to introduce AI, it will amplify what is already happening. If you have bad practices, it will enable more bad practices. If you have good practices, then it will enable your people to be more efficient. And ideally, you're cutting out a lot of processes that shouldn't be done, that don't need to be done, okay? But this is an exceptionally important concept. I would encourage everybody to think about this anytime you're in a discussion where you're talking about using agentic AI, automation, anything like that. Okay, we're going to dive into case studies, and this is going to be the rest of the talk, okay? I think we'll hold questions until the end, But for any of these case studies, we can go as deep as you would like on how they are actually done, okay? This first one is for a digital loan and title processing company, okay? So this is a company where, go to a car dealer, you buy a car. You get a loan for that car when you buy it. You fill out way too much paperwork when you do this, right? We've all done it, okay? Every single one of those forms that you're signing is scanned by the car dealer, whether you know it or not. They do two things. They actually scan those pages, and they put the information from those pages in one of their systems, okay? After they do that, they send the paperwork and the data to a company like this, digital company that manages the paperwork and the data with the state, okay? Because everything has to go to the state. It has to be registered. Well, they actually do about 60,000 deals a month. Think about a deal as a packet, right? I go in there, I buy a car, that's a deal. And of those deals, they typically will have, say, 8 PDFs for each one, say 30 pages each. So they're dealing with, on the scale of millions of pages of documents a month, okay? Every single one of those deals have to be read by a person to make sure that the data is right, okay? That's a lot. And that's literally for them, 25 people sitting in an office every day just reading deals, okay? That means that if they double their volume, they have to hire 25 more people. And that's a bottleneck for them. So that's an easy one for them. They literally can't take twice the number of deals unless they hire twice the number of people, okay? Not good margins, okay? For them, they have an agent. We're actually going to go from less to more sophisticated in these examples. This is the least sophisticated that we're going to talk about today, because there are 3 things that this agent does, and I would actually classify this as more a workflow than an agent, okay? But this is really important, because the more specific you can make a task for an agent, the better it does, just like a person, right? The first thing that it does is it classifies every page. Usually they're one-page documents, and so that's easy. This is the front of a title. This is a driver's license. This is a loan application, right? Classifies it. That classification is, for all intents and purposes, at 100% accuracy. And I say that because it might get one wrong, 1 out of 5,000, 1 out of 10,000. It's basically a rounding error for them, and when it gets it wrong because it's the back of a piece of paper that a human can't recognize either. So it's actually on par or better than a human would do. Then it extracts the data from it. And the reason we classify is so that we can be very specific with extracting. So with a front of a title application, you know there's a VIN, first name, last name, address, loan amount, all of that. You can literally say the VIN is going to be second from the top. It's going to be 17 alphanumeric characters. They're all going to be in individual boxes. Watch out for 5s instead of S's. 5s also look a lot like 8s. You can give all very, very specific instruction to make sure that that extraction is accurate. I will say, if you've ever done this, LLMs actually have a really hard time extracting VINs accurately. In fact, before Claude Sonnet 4.5, you would see an accuracy rate of about 75 to 80% accurate. Just with a new vision model, Sonnet 4.5, which is available on Bedrock, it's available lots of places, that went up to about 97%. Just a new model, same prompt, same instructions, same everything. But what we are able to do by extracting the data in a specific format is we cut down the number of human reviews that need to be done from the full 60,000 to only the ones that we couldn't verify. Because what we do is we extract, and then programmatically we compare that to what they have on record. And if it matches, we consider it a match. It's good to go. If it doesn't match, then it goes into their review queue. And what you end up seeing is that they go from about 60,000 a month to about 9,000. So with the same team, they can approximately 5x the capacity that they do. And that's a single workflow, but it's the workflow that addresses the most important bottleneck within their business. And so once again, just to get into the mindset, that's why it's important to identify your constraint. All right, second case study. This one's a little bit more. It's a title and escrow company. So you go and you buy a house. You're going to go to a closing company to buy a house, right? How many of you have done this? Bought a house, had a closing company, right? Okay. When you're doing this process, how many of you had random questions you were asking the closing company? Something as silly as, oh, when was my closing date again? Or how much do I owe? Or here's my termite letter, right? It's a very, very communication-heavy transaction. It's high stress. As somebody who's done it before as well, you have lots of questions, it's a lot of money, you're moving in and out. There's a lot going on, okay? Well, for this particular company, that communication was the bottleneck. If I was going to double my business next week, where would it fall flat? They literally wouldn't be able to keep up with the communication from customers. And a lot of that communication is very straightforward. When is my closing date? Every customer has a file. On the file is the closing date. That is very easy to read. But it takes a person seeing the email, knowing who the customer is, looking up the file, and then sending back the closing date, right? It's just the sheer volume. And so inevitably, what they would have to do is they would have to triage the questions that come in, right? If I have a closing tomorrow, then I have to prioritize anything to do with that as opposed to the 5 emails I just got from people that I know aren't closing for the next 2 weeks. And so it didn't happen often, but sometimes people would wait up to 2 weeks for an answer to an email. Just sheer volume, just sheer volume. And so they actually had 2 goals. They wanted to increase the capacity of their team, and they also wanted to have better customer service. They wanted to be faster to respond to people, more helpful to respond to people. And so their constraint was this inbound email volume. Well, let's compare this to some of the things that we mentioned at the beginning that could be good indicators for agentic AI. High volume, repeatable, and something that I can look at and I can measure before and afterwards, right? But not at all as straightforward as the first example we talked about. So this is what I would consider an actual agent that is implemented with them. And the action, if you will, the thing that invokes this particular agent is any email they get, period, to their company, goes to this agent. It is hooked up to their email. And a lot of the emails are ignored. I don't know how to do this, or I'm not trained to do this, and so it just is entirely ignored. But most of them will be routed to an agent, sub-agent, that is trained on how to answer that specific question or perform that specific task. So how many of you were at the Booz Allen presentation a little earlier today? It was very good. So they mentioned this pattern, right, which is delegation, maybe I have sub-agents, and handoff, right? I will tell you that every single workflow agent solution that we do has some form of this. The more complex an agent needs to get, the more obvious it is that you're going to get a routing agent or an orchestrator agent, whatever you might want to call it. And just in case anybody's wondering, real world orchestrators, routers, those can work with basically 100% accuracy. It's just not going to get it wrong because it's an easy question to answer. Like this email, what are they asking? Well, I can put that into 3 or 4 buckets. And to be on the safe side, I can put one of those buckets as, I don't know. And then I hand it off to a human, and I'm good, right? It can be as simple as that, okay? But what the router knows is that questions about the file, I can answer immediately. And I can just stage it and move back. Now, there's a lot that goes on here, right? And just, once again, we can peel back the onion a little bit to know what that is. So an email comes in programmatically, which means deterministically, which means every time I can know who that email came from, right? I've got the email address. That is not something that goes to AI. It's not something that goes to an LLM. So I don't have to worry about accuracy there. I know that it came from this person. And so I can literally query a system and say, do I know who this person is? Are they part of one of my open closings, one of my open cases? If the answer is yes, then I have the case. I'm good to go. Now, a lot of people have multiple email addresses, so sometimes that doesn't work out. But what people will do is they'll say reclosing at, 1031 Bob Wayne Street, right? And so I've got an address, and I can pull that out, and I can query by address as well. So the matching a person and an email to an order, as they call it, is actually quite complex. There's a lot that goes into that. But we would consider that a task that an agent specifically does. Given an email, match it to an open order. Can I match it to an open order? Can I not? And it does that with a degree of confidence. If it has a high degree of confidence, we know this person, this order, here's the information. Part of the information on that order is a closing date. Done. They asked the closing date. I looked it up. I'm going to respond. A lot happened behind the scenes, and if we're thinking about orders of magnitude or thinking about complexity here, one of the things that we're often asked is, well, how many prompts are we talking about here, right? How many back and forths are we talking about here? You know, for just the idea of order opening, probably 10 to 20, depending on complexity. One of the reasons for that is we make things very specific. Generally, if 2 things are being done within a single call, we're going to break that into 2 calls. And a reason for that is just accuracy and repeatability. The more interesting thing that this agent can do, though, is it can perform actions within their system. Their system is a system called Qualia. It's a closing system. It's one of the top ones, and they have an API, a very robust API. And so one of the things that happens when you close is you have to get a termite letter, make sure that it's not infested. Well, every closing has a termite letter. When they get that termite letter, they attach it to an email, they send it in, somebody has to see that, look it up, put it on their file. Unless you have an agent that says, oh, this is a termite letter, I'm going to attach it to the file and say, cool, you're good to go, I've notified your realtor. If you think about how often that happens, once per closing, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, doesn't really matter. If I'm doing 50 closings a week, that's a lot of time for a single person. And it can also help you think that the more capabilities I give these agents, the more time it can save me. But now it can update documents. Now, how many of you in here are in security, cyber, that kind of thing? Just one. Okay. We'll skip over the security implications of that then. How many of you would be interested to know the security implications? Okay, you all, okay. Well, one of the questions asked this morning was, how do I know that an agent should be able to take an action, right? Because there's a lot of fear out there right now that an agent will go rogue and will start doing things within my system. And so I need to clear up a couple of misconceptions. There are people out there right now who are putting something like Claude Code, or they're putting ClaudeBot, now called Moltbot, on their machine, which is a LLM hooked up in a loop that can access your file system and do all kinds of stuff. If you do that, you do have serious security concerns, and so just be aware of that. That's not how any of these systems work, okay? Think about a traditional software system. Request comes in. I know who that request is from. We're going to assume that they're authenticated. I've logged in using my username and password. So the system knows who I am. In any traditional system, because it knows who I am, it knows what I can do and cannot do. And it's just button clicks and whatever, and sometimes I get to a spot in an app where I shouldn't, and I try and click something and it says, you can't do that, okay? When you've got an agent behind the scenes, that agent is still working because of some action, right? And that action has been taken by somebody, okay? In the case of a chatbot, that somebody is the user who is logged in. If you're logged into ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, you have a user, you have things you can do, can't do, okay? Now let's just assume that you logged into your application, you have permissions. Now I also have a chatbot within that application. It can do things for me. Behind the scenes, when it decides, oh, this user wants to make an action, it needs to order something or close a task or create a task. Behind the scenes, that's no different than traditional software saying this user wants to do this thing, okay? And when an agent says, create this action, do this function, you might have heard tool calling or something like that, the agent isn't actually doing it. The agent just took a prompt, was given a potential tool that it could call, and it calls the script back and says, hey, we think the user wants to call this function. Do you want to let them do it or not? So it's actually still your code that's running. It's not the agent that's going rogue, unless you've done something really dumb and really non-standard. That's how it would work. Okay, so I think that's important because there's a lot of fear around LLMs and agents and what they can do or can't do right now. For the most part, your existing, say, role-based authentication, all of that security stuff, still applies to agents, okay? All right, so here are the things that it can do, right? It can give instant answers, it can do automated document processing. The last one that it can do is actually a really interesting one that we didn't think about when we originally implemented it, but became really important, which is it could actually just tag the right people on a thread, right? So an email comes in, and it was actually sent to the wrong person, but it's really important. It's high priority, or it needs to be triaged, or somebody's really angry, and it was just sent to the wrong person, so they don't know. Well, because we know their file, we know who the loan officer is, we know who the realtor is, we know all the people of contact on it. And so we can actually say, oh, well, by the way, you're the realtor on this and you're keeping the client relationship. Just FYI, this person's really upset. You should probably know about it. And that's actually, you think back to the priorities of this company, right? They had two priorities. First was to increase capacity. The second was just to have a better user experience. Well, if I email the wrong user, the wrong person at a company, and they just forward it along and say, hey, you need to look at this, and I get a call back real quick that says, hey, I saw you were upset, just wanted to give you a call, that's much better customer service. And so kind of unintended, we didn't know about it at the time, but this is actually one of the more powerful things. And it's just routing. It's just tagging people on an email. And because we've been able to cut down on all the email they have to look at, it's able to be brought up and more visible too. Generally, the system will respond in about 2 minutes. And if you think about that, it will depend on everything that it has to do. How many orders does it have to look through? How big is the email chain? How many people are on it? But in general, they're getting responses in about 2 minutes. And about 50% of the emails they have coming in right now are automatically processed, meaning a human doesn't have to look at it. Now, let's talk about how long it took to get there. Because when they turned it on day one, trust but verify is a really important thing when you have agents talking to your customers. You really want to make sure that what they say is right. And so we had a pilot period of a month where we would compose a response, but it never went to the customer immediately. Then as we became more confident in it, we automatically sent the response. Okay? And they have people from their team who CC it on every email anyway, and their customers know that behind the scenes, AI is responding to them because AI is much more professional and formal. No matter what the tone and voice you give people, they will know when you have proper punctuation on every email and when you list out all the details that they're asking for on an email, it's not a person. Or if it is a person, it's a very special person. So, but they are seeing about a 50% automation rate, which is huge for their business. And we're hoping that goes up to 75, 80%. Okay, once again, we're going from less to more complex here. Now we're going to talk about a staffing company. And this is a staffing company that primarily works in education, but also does some government contracts as well. They're doing hourly workers, so they are variable schedule, high turnover, and I'm not going to say unreliable, but by nature of the work, it is part-time. It's not meant to be full-time. So it's not as repeatable as you might think. So they want to grow, but the primary blocker for them is that they have what's called a customer success manager. A customer success manager manages a certain number of hourly employees, right? So when I support a customer, that customer has a certain number of people that they place every week. And per number of people that I place, I have to have people on my team who can manage the employees. And think about it, right? It's a staffing company. This is not a staffing company who hires for other companies. They're a staffing company who will staff for you. Think substitute teachers, think cafeteria workers, think custodians. All of those, like if you go to the Von Braun Civic Center down here for the Huntsville natives, they don't employ the people who work there. They have staffing companies who employ most of them because it's just easier. It's high turnover, and they don't want to be in that business, okay? So lots of places like that. Actually, the Space and Rocket Center has quite a few of that staff as well, okay? Well, once again, they want to scale the business without scaling the number of CSMs they have, customer support or success managers. If I got another client next week who had 5,000 weekly placements, that would be great, but it probably means right now that I have to hire 50 CSMs because their ratio when we started this was about 100 workers to 1 CSM. So that was the constraint. And they were thinking big. They really bought into this, which as a company or a team is really important. They wanted to build a digital recruiter and team member, digital employee. So here's what we got. Full disclaimer and full transparency, every image you saw in here was AI generated, including my headshot at the beginning. It's a great likeness, but it is AI. So if you think about what this staffing company was doing, they had 2 loops that they needed to accommodate. One is the hiring loop. It's always happening. It's high turnover business. I need to find people, I need to interview them, I need to onboard them, and I need to teach them, okay? That's that left-hand loop, the hiring loop. Then, once they're onboarded, I need to support them. They get paid every week. They work every week. They have questions all over the place. And once again, because it's a variable business, sometimes it can get tricky. When am I scheduled this week? And they have an app, they have technology, but it's just a high communication, high volume industry. It just is. And so we built an agent. I hate saying that. You could envelop all of it under calling it a digital recruiter. You can, but behind the scenes it's 12 agents. And behind the scenes, every time they get an email, but most of the time it's text, they have it hooked up to a text, to a phone number. Every time somebody comes in and gets a text, it goes to an orchestrator. And that orchestrator knows a couple of things. I know who this came from because I got the phone number or the email address. Are you in my system? Are you not in my system? If you're not in my system, am I trying to hire you? Am I not trying to hire you, right? And think about this as a tree. These are decision matrices that can be routed to different agents who maybe know how to do certain things. But within the recruiting flow, it manages writing job descriptions. That's an easy one. Everybody can think of how ChatGPT or anything would be good at that. It can evaluate applications. It doesn't make the final decision. It just analyzes and gives a grade on how good a match it was. It actually conducts voice interviews. So at some point in time, when you get through the application process, you're like, are you ready to complete your application? If you say yes, you'll get a phone call from an agent that says, hey, are you ready to complete your application? I am AI. You can kind of tell that it's AI, but I would highly encourage you, if you aren't aware of the advances in voice and conversational AI, to look into it because it's exceptional. And the best models, you can't tell that they're AI. So this will, you don't like calling it an interview. It's more completing their application. And the reason we say it's not an interview is because the AI is not evaluating them. It's just asking the questions to make sure that you know, oh, this is generally a variable work schedule job. So you need to be ready. Are you ready to work anytime, 9 to 5, Monday through Saturday? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Can you tell me about these experiences? Yes. Okay. And per job description, that interview is different. When the agent calls them, it has instructions on what to ask about, what not to ask about. It has instructions not to let people take it off the rails and talk about the Super Bowl instead. That happens. But they get that, and then afterwards we evaluate the transcript of that call. It's like, does this sound like somebody we want to hire or not? And what the team members get is just a summary of that, as well as access to the transcript. Okay, so it speeds up that loop entirely. A human is always making the hiring decision. Just put that out there. Sometimes it's not obvious. It is obvious here. Humans making the decision. Now, on the support loop, it's actually supporting the workers who are working. They're picking up jobs each and every day. They're doing that primarily through their text messages, and it's not that different than ChatGPT, right? But behind the scenes, there are lots of things that can happen because it is text-based. One, I don't expect an answer immediately. which is good because a lot of stuff goes on behind the scenes. You should expect an answer in 45 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, depending on what's going on. But if I text in, I can say, what's my schedule this week? And behind the scenes, it says, oh, I've got this phone number in my system. I know who this is. I look up their work schedule. I respond with it. Good to go. Some more complex things that it can do is somebody might say, hey, I worked last week, but my time card says 9 to 5, and I worked 8 to 5. It's like, cool. All right, I know who you are. I know what your work schedule was. I know that you did actually clock in from 9 to 5 last week. Let me read the text and say, oh, you actually said 8 to 5. Now, this is an interesting problem because that's a natural language problem. Before LLMs, that could be done, but that would take a lot of time and money and cost, and the variability in a conversation would make it not worth it. With LLMs, they're pretty good at picking that out. But you still want to be sure that you're making the right adjustments for them because this can impact their paycheck. And as all of you, I'm sure, can imagine, get a paycheck wrong, people get upset, even by an hour. And so trust but verify can actually work internal to an agent. What I mean by that is this agent will say, okay, I hear that you want to change your time card. You said 8 to 5 instead. I'm going to make that update. Does that sound good? And if they say yes, then they just verified for you. Your user just verified for you. And getting back an explicit command that's been acknowledged by a user is a pretty powerful and accurate way of saying, I did the right thing. So I just had the user verify for me. I didn't have to have a team member do it for me. The other things that it can do is it can look up profile information. It can look up paycheck information, right? I mean, you can imagine what it has access to and what it can understand from a natural language perspective. But similar to what we were talking about with the title and closing the email volume, this means that all of a sudden they don't have the same volume just day in and day out, where it's little things like what's my schedule, or can you update my time, or are there any jobs that I can pick up next week? So they actually went from 100 workers being supported by a CSM to 500 today. So far it's taken about 4 months to get there. We're still going. The goal is 1,000. The goal is for them to be able to support 1,000 to 1 as a ratio. They started at 100 to 1. They're at 500 to 1 today. I think we have a path to get to 1,000 to 1, but something that is so critically important about this example is as a business, as an organization, they were bought into changing their internal processes to work differently, very differently. The tooling that was built for them enables agentic AI. The tooling is all about agentic AI. So once again, we think about processes. We started that by talking about what's the right process. Well, coming up with these two loops was us coming up with what process do we want to support with agentic AI. This was not their process beforehand, but it was their process when we wanted to start introducing automation. And that's so critically important. Okay, so this is actually going to be a fun thing that I want to ask the audience about. So we had a question, we had a task from a customer. They have about 30,000 legacy contracts. All of these contracts vary between 50 pages long to the longest one we saw was about 850 pages long, okay? And they were all in a drive somewhere, and they wanted to extract 110 data points from every contract. And these data points were everything from what's the date, what's the amount, to what's the payment plan, which could actually be referenced in a lot of different areas, a lot of different pages, sections, and because of it, it takes a human to read. They might need to read pages 1 through 5 and then pages 80 through 85 because there are exceptions to it, okay? So all that to say that some of this is objective, some of it is more subjective. It's really hard to read and understand. And so they asked us, well, what level of accuracy can you get in extracting those data points? And can it be as good as our people doing it? We're like, we have no idea how good your people are at it, so let's find out. So we actually took, I think, 20 examples, and they had one of their analysts come out and extract these data points. And I just want to hear, how accurate do you think their analyst was? Anybody? Okay, 85, I heard two 85s, a 75, a 62. We found that the human reviewers were at about 65% accuracy. And this was, as the person on the phone with them at the time, this was a bad moment for me because as I was talking to them, we gave them our initial results. We said, okay, well, what did you get? Here's what we got. Nothing matched. Like the first 50 data points didn't match. And so I'm sweating bullets saying, how did we get this so wrong? When we read through it, it looks right. And so we get about a half hour into a call with them, with the analyst who was the one extracting it, and it's a little awkward on the call, but finally one of the people on their team just said it. It's like, okay, so we were terrible at extracting these things. It's like, yes, you were. So I bring this up because actually I wrote something on this because to me, there's a fallacy right now. And I call it the fallacy of human perfection in doing these tasks. Because I hear from every CEO that we talk to, what level of accuracy can you get? When's it going to be at 100%? And I'll be the first to tell them it won't be at 100%. Now maybe it'll be at 99.99%. But it won't be at 100% right. And guess what? Your people doing it aren't at 100%. And there's a mismatch there. And I bring this up just so you all can be aware of it and take it as a data point as well, because this was a high-profile task done very deliberately. Like the analysts, the team member, when they were given this task was, we need these to be correct, do it. But it's 110 data points over PDFs that were sometimes hundreds of pages long. That's a really difficult thing to do right. Turns out that AI can do it really, really well. And at this point, that was the initial accuracy. It's a little higher than that right now. But what we found is that for their purposes of reporting, 96% was way more than it needed to be for them to get a good picture of their data. So I would just encourage you all to have that perspective that oftentimes we're comparing agentic AI solutions to perfection, and it shouldn't be. A lot of questions can be answered almost perfectly, anecdotally as well as empirically, because we benchmark the things that we do, and if you take the time to benchmark it, you'll find that it can be done. But this is just, this will always be a fascinating, funny memory for me. So, once again, I want you to remember the patterns for success here, okay? Start with your constraints. And the reason I say this so importantly is because if you're in a business that just wants to adopt AI because it's the newest, shiniest thing, because your CEO sees that it's important and it's popular, you're not going to move the needle, and you're going to introduce another tool that is just introducing friction, complexity, cost, time. So start with your constraints, okay? Target high friction areas. It needs to be a lived pain because you're going to introduce some amount of change to your organization, and to overcome the friction of just introducing change, you need to have more pain from whatever it's solving, okay? So that's extremely important. And then think about this in terms of workflows. They can be agentic workflows, that's fine. But think about it in terms of what am I starting with? And what do I want to end with? That's really important. What do I start with? What do I want to end with? Start and end. Because that's actually going to really help you think about the capabilities of these tools. That was one of my purposes with showing you the case studies. Lots goes on behind the scenes to enable that. But what do I start with? What do I end with? Well, a lot of times I start with a text, and I end with a text. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, a lot of data that's being fetched, a lot of traditional software engineering, but it's kind of a magical experience once I see it in action, and it's very doable these days. Okay, a couple things. One, I share case studies like this all the time because something I'm passionate about is showing business leaders, individuals, what can practically be done with AI. That's really important to me. There is so much noise right now everywhere about what can and can't be done. It's really important for me to be able to share what is being done, what practically can be done. So I'll say that. The second thing is you want to Connect with me on LinkedIn. There's my handle. That's where I share it. The other thing, though, and this is totally open-ended, every Friday from 1 to 2, I have 15-minute office hours where anybody who wants to say, can this be done with AI, I will chat with. It's open calendar invite. So if you look me up on LinkedIn, I share it there once a week. And last week I had somebody ask me about their accounting firm wants to implement an internal chatbot trained on their data that just answers questions about their SOPs. And I said, well, why aren't you just using ChatGPT for that? And he said, I know. We probably should be. And the reason was they started this a year ago, and the company that they got in contact with said, oh, no, we can do it way better than ChatGPT can. Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but over the past year, ChatGPT's gotten a lot better. So is Claude, so is Gemini. And I will specifically say that something we don't do as a company is chatbots, because it's pretty saturated. The ones that are out there are pretty good, and you don't need something custom these days. So I really encourage everybody that if they have an idea, push it, see if it can be done, because probably can be done. And check out the tooling that is there today, because the current suite of capabilities are so much more accessible than any other technology we've ever seen. And before I open it up for questions, I'm going to ask just a couple of questions real quick, because I like getting feedback from you all on what is and is not useful to hear at conferences like this. And you've got people at all levels, right? And so one of the things that I thought would be interesting, and I would bring back to the organizers, is a session that is dedicated entirely to all the things that are possible with the commercially available LLMs. So I know that last year we actually had a session on Notebook LM, which is a tool from Google that allows you to create your own podcasts from content. You can literally take a bunch of content in PDF form, drag and drop it into Notebook LM, and it will create a podcast for you. It sounds very real. It is not awkward at all. And you can listen to it, and it will teach you whatever it is you'd like to know, okay? Google actually has probably a half dozen services, from marketing material to image generation, that are very, very good. And I don't know how many people know about them or don't. Generating slide decks that are very, very good, at least better than I can do. This was generated by Gemini. I came up with the content, but it actually generated the slides for me, including the images. So how many of you would be interested in that? Raise of hands. Okay. How many of you would like to go deeper than that? Okay, about the same number of people. Okay, well, thank you for that, and love to answer questions.
All right. Hey, Christopher. Ooh, thanks for a great talk, especially for the reality check there at the end about the illusion of our own perfection. Yeah. Could you talk some about, especially you're talking about agents, potentially LLMs having access to customer data. Those are really high value, high sensitivity assets. Can you talk some about your deployment architecture, specifically with regard to on-prem versus off-prem cloud assets?
Yeah, that's extremely important, and a few thoughts there. So for my company, GenServe, we have commercial agreements with all the major model providers for private data, which means your data is never used for training. It's never kept for longer than their logging period. So for all of you who don't know, it's pretty much standard across all the major providers, OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini. I actually don't know about XAI or Mistral, for instance, but not a lot of people use those for commercial applications today. But if you use the API, they will not train on your data, and they will only keep it for as long as is necessary for logging, which generally means 30 days. So they will keep a record of your prompt and the response for 30 days. For a lot of companies, that's enough, especially if you're not processing PII, okay? Now we move into different levels of security, right? So for PII, depending on the customer profile, and depending on what you're doing, those standard enterprise safeguards can be enough. So my application is secured with role-based authentication and is not accessible, and I have an agreement with the model providers so that that data is not retained and is not trained on. That can be enough as well. Generally, what you will have the customer do is bring their own keys so that it's their account that's being used, not yours. And our platform does allow that. So any of our customers that have a large deployment, they've got their own account, and it's not there's not going to be any cross-pollination. However, if you think about the higher levels of security, PHI is one of them, personal health identifiable information, and the other is financial data. The government gets really scared when you start dealing with socials and loan applications and all of that, understandably. And so for them, we do a private deployment into their cloud. So we ourselves are AWS-based. A couple of the customers we have are also AWS-based. So we deploy our platform into their cloud. Nothing ever leaves it. Couple things to keep in mind when you think about data that goes to an LLM is, and this was actually in the, they touched a little bit on it in the data course this morning, or the data talk this morning, which is you should really only send the information necessary to get an answer. And generally, that actually doesn't include PII and certainly doesn't include PHI. So if I need to fetch a user's profile, then I can generally do that by name or by email or by something else. And yes, email can be considered PII, got it. But you're not sharing addresses or socials or anything that can be really, really dangerous. So I'd be aware of that. The other thing that I'd be aware of when we talk about private deployments, and this is really important, is so AWS has AWS Bedrock. If you use AWS Bedrock, you don't have to have any information leaving your private cloud. If I have a virtual private cloud, VPC within Bedrock, even if I'm using one of their commercially available models, they guarantee that does not leave their cloud. So there's that. Every major provider has some flavor of that, right? So Azure has it, Google Cloud has it. They all have some flavor of that. What I will say, though, is that the models that are on Bedrock, Azure, and Google Cloud that are hosted there privately, they behave differently than the models that are commercially available. Don't know why. They don't know why either, but they do. And it's usually a combination of compute, system prompt, all of that. So for instance, when you go to ChatGPT and you're typing in the window, you could give it a prompt and settings and everything and do the exact same call through the API and get different results, because ChatGPT is an application that has a system prompt that does things differently than the API. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's actually extremely important to just know that private deployments do have more constraints because model availability is different across clouds, and the models behave differently. There was another question.
Yeah, so in the context of ROI, talk through like how you approach that from a pro forma standpoint ahead of doing a project versus coming back and looking at actuals. Are your clients wanting to see like internal rate of return, net present value, things like that?
Yeah, so really good question. I should have touched on that. We will almost always do a POC before we do a long-term engagement with the client. And we do that to note two things: feasibility and economics. Feasibility is not easy because, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, the first 80% of an AI project is usually easy. You can get impressive results, but the question is really, can you make it accurate and consistent enough to be production ready, right? So honestly, we've done this enough that if you had an example, I could probably just tell you whether or not you could get the accuracy results, because we've been doing it for 3 years now. And some things, the answer is just no, even today. So for example, the top LLMs still have a really hard time reading calendar-like structures where you have maybe long rows of white space that a human would be able to read 100% of the time, every time. Just doesn't do very good on that right now. So anyway, anecdote. But we focus on a POC because what that will also tell us is, in order to get the right results repeatably, about what models do you need to use and how many steps do I need to take. And that will directly inform cost, right? Because if I know generally what's the spectrum of what I'm going to be ingesting, and then I can know how many steps and which models am I going to take, I can model out how much is that going to cost. So for example, the contracts that we were ingesting and extracting those 110 data points from, well, obviously it's a lot more expensive to extract data from 800 pages of text than it is from 20 pages of text. And so we had to take a sample from their data set to know what's the average page size. Just so happens the average page size was closer to 30. So we could work with that. And we could tell them in general that it's going to cost about 20 cents with Gemini Flash 2.0 to process this contract. And I think that's actually accurate. Now, what's interesting is if Gemini Flash 2.0 was not on the market, the entire project would not have been economical for them. Because we tested every model, and we tested all the accuracy that we could get from it. And I can tell you that Gemini 2 Flash represented a paradigm shift where it was the most capable model for the lowest price point, bar none, by far. Since then, there have been some competitors, but at that time, that was true. If we had to go with Gemini 2 Pro or even Mini, GPT-4 Mini at that time, their cost would have been almost 10x. And they could pay 20 cents a contract, even over 30,000 contracts. That's a rounding error for them, totally worth it. But they couldn't pay 600 grand to do it. And that was the difference for them. It was either 20 cents a contract or sometimes $5 a contract. And it just, so that's how we think about it. Now, for the transactional ones, right, and this is really important. So for the transactional ones, say the staffing company, they need to know in general how much is a message going to cost me to process and how many messages am I going to get a day. Now, at first, we could model that based on what their current support volume was. How many questions do I get a day? And then we could just say, well, based on that, how many interactions do we think it's going to take to answer their question? And we made some assumptions. We actually ended up being conservative, where for them, it's actually costing cents for them to process every message, just a few cents. The other thing that I'll say is these days you have a ton of flexibility in the models you're using, where the most expensive models, the most capable models, are generally ones that you only have to use for maybe one step in the process. You can use the most cost-effective, the fastest models most of the time. They've just gotten so unbelievably powerful. For perspective, for me, the paradigm shift in LLMs was the release of GPT-4, because when GPT-4 released, we had benchmarks that we ran, and we noticed that these models were capable enough to do real work, to really get good results. But at that point, it was so cost prohibitive, it was unusable. I think it was $30 per million tokens, and if you contrast that with Flash 2.0, which is 20 cents per million tokens, right? But for me, that was the paradigm shift. And the cheapest models today, the minis on GPT-5, the haikus on Claude, and then the Flash on Gemini, they're all much more capable than those models. So you have a lot of flexibility. So does that answer your question? Okay. Other questions? Yeah, so those are two really good questions. So the first question is, how do we deal with model upgrades and what the experience for the customer is? The second question is more about how you continue to audit and have confidence in the responses as you increase automation. So I'll take the first. Model upgrades are, I would say, the primary advantage that we offer our customers. So when we put a solution in place, we consider it AI as a service, where we are going to put in place an entire architecture for you. It's going to be based on our platform. If we need it to be email-based, we're the ones who hook that up. If it needs to be text-based, we'll hook that up. If it needs to be an API call, we hook that up. Behind the scenes, all of it is running on the GenSurf platform. As new models come up, we track those and benchmark them every release, because if it's a faster one that's cheaper, we want to use it. If it's just a better one and we're not getting the results we want, we want to use it as well. So we take the upgrade for the customer. And generally when a new model comes out, we're able to upgrade it within, say, 2 weeks. Though I will say, anecdote here, that the Gemini upgrades, when Gemini comes out with a new model and puts it in preview, it is truly in preview. Don't ever put that in production. Of all the model providers, it is the one that is most likely to put out a breaking model because they want to get feedback very, very quickly. Generally, a Claude model, an OpenAI model in preview is actually pretty reliable. The Gemini ones are not. But the other thing that's interesting is that unless a model is deprecated, generally we get good enough results that we don't need to upgrade it unless there's a cost savings. So once again, we don't use the top models unless it's necessary to use them. So generally the new model releases don't actually represent either a increase in capability or a decrease in cost. But we manage that for the customer. The second question is a really good one on just kind of how we manage the interaction with the customer and the automation rates, which is we take a sample of the interactions that are being automated and we examine them. The reality of it, though, is that when things go wrong, your customers tell you that they're going wrong, and they will typically flag them for you. I will say that it is extremely rare for something to go wrong that we don't catch, because we have in place safeguards that are similar to hallucination checks, but not quite the same. So hallucination check, everybody talks about hallucinations. I will just say anecdotally that when you ground an LLM in proper context, hallucination rates are exceptionally low. And by exceptionally low, I mean in the 0.1 percentile. We'll see 1 out of 1,000 be a true hallucination. And what I mean by that is, where did it get that? You read it and say, where did it get that? Most of the time you read it and say, okay, that's slightly off, but I get it. I understand why it made that decision, okay? So that's a hallucination check. But an escalation is one thing that we build into all of our customer-facing agents, and it's where I'm going to go through an entire process to examine what I need to send back to the customer. Before I send it back, I'm going to read it one more time and see, should I be sending this back or not? And if there's any ambiguity at all, I'm going to escalate that to a human, and it doesn't go back. And if you think about the percentages we're dealing with here, the chance of a hallucination happening versus compounded with a hallucination check failing, compounded with a escalation check failing, you're dealing with really small numbers. So it doesn't happen very often. But the more important thing is the automation that's happening day in and day out. And the way that the teams deal with that is just by having perfect visibility. So those CSMs, for instance, for the staffing company, even though they're not actively responding to the employees, they see the threads that are happening. So they're actually reading it day in and day out and giving feedback saying, hey, you know, this was too much information, or that's actually factually wrong, let's update our knowledge base, stuff like that. So it takes monitoring, but I would say that's actually part of the process that a company signs up for when they change their process. If you're going to buy into automation, you have to have safeguards in place to make sure that that automation improves. So, any other questions? Well, I really appreciate the questions, and I appreciate you guys coming. So I hope you enjoyed it, and feel free to tag me afterwards if you want to ask other questions, but appreciate you coming.